Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. UFC 284, Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski is almost here, and I am going to go through the entire pay-per-view main card, briefly discuss each fight, and then at the end of the video, I am going to grade UFC 284 on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being the worst pay-per-view ever, 10 being the greatest pay-per-view of all time. And I'm also going to answer the question, with UFC pay-per-view prices continuing to go up year after year, Dana White jacking up the pay-per-view prices, I'm going to answer the question whether or not you should purchase UFC 284 or you should skip the card entirely. Now, before I get into any of that, I am putting the entire pay-per-view main card down in the description. Go take a look at it real quick and then comment down below what grade would you give UFC 284 on a scale from 1 to 10, from worst to best. I'm curious what your opinion is before you even hear my opinion. Now, also, I have a bunch of UFC 284 content already on the channel. I will link a couple videos down in the description, but I have some UFC 284 prediction videos coming next week, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of those. Okay, so now when I grade a UFC card, what are the most important factors I look at when grading a card? One is relevancy of the fight. Is it a championship fight? Is it a #1 contender fight? Two, are both fighters elite level fighters? Are they middle of the road fighters? Are they absolute trash cans? How good are they as far as their skill sets? And three, should the fight be an exciting fight? Is it a fan-friendly matchup? How do I think it's actually going to play out? I think those are the three most important factors when looking at a fight. Now, looking at the UFC 284 main card, opening up the main card is Jimmy Crute versus Alonzo Menifield. This is a fight, it's within the light heavyweight division. It's not that great of a fight, to be honest. These are two kind of middle-of-the-road fighters. Jimmy Crute's on a 2-fight losing streak. Hasn't fought since December of 2021. Then you have Alonzo Menifield. He's on a 2-fight win streak, not against the best competition, but at least it's 2 stoppage wins in the first round. He's been relatively exciting. Of his 13 wins, he has 10 by knockout. But this fight really doesn't mean a whole lot. There was a point in time where people thought Jimmy Crute was going to make a run to become a contender in the light heavyweight division, but it's just not looking like that's going to happen. And as far as Alonzo Menifield, I mean, it's possible, but it's very, very doubtful. He's 35 years old. I know the guys up at the higher weight classes, whether it be light heavyweight or heavyweight, I believe they have a longer shelf life rather than if you're down at like bantamweight, or featherweight or lightweight even. But I just don't think Alonzo Menifield's ever going to become an elite fighter. I don't think he's ever going to be even a top 15 fighter. And Jimmy Crute, it's hard to say because at one point he did look very good, but he's lost 2 fights in a row against the best competition he's ever fought in Jamal Hill and Anthony Smith. I just don't think this is a super high-level fight. I do think it is an exciting fight. I think this will be exciting while it lasts. Most likely it will end in a finish, but it means nothing in the division. Neither one of these guys is the elite of the elite skill set. And to be honest, this is a decent prelim fight. This belongs on the prelims of a pay-per-view. Or, maybe opening up like a fight night main card. But this has no business opening up a pay-per-view card, in my opinion. It's just not all that great of a fight. And really, it's just one of those fights that you just feel, okay, this is just filling a hole on a UFC fight card. It's nothing that anybody's super excited about. It's nothing that anybody's really talking about. It's just one of those fights where, okay, we're going to watch Jimmy Crute and Alonzo Menifield. Potentially, one of these guys is going to get KO'd or TKO'd in this fight. So at least it has that going for it. Moving up on the card, we have a heavyweight fight, Justin Taffa versus Parker Porter. What does this fight mean at all? I mean, Parker Porter's on the main card of a UFC pay-per-view. I mean, oh man, this is not really a high skill level fight. Justin Taffa, he beat Harry Hunsucker in his last fight, but what does that really mean? I really have no idea what that really means. It means pretty much nothing. I mean, he has a loss to Jarrett Vandera. He has a loss to Carlos Felipe. This is just one of those fights. Again, I think the UFC is just looking for a potential KO, TKO. And I have to cut the UFC some slack here on this particular card because you lost Robert Whittaker versus Paulo Costa. You lost Kai Kara France versus Alex Perez. But to have Justin Tafa versus Parker Porter on the main card of a pay-per-view, this fight is virtually meaningless. Neither one of these guys is never going to be a contender in a shallow heavyweight division, okay? In a shallow heavyweight division. Neither one of these guys is going to be a contender ever, in my opinion. And basically, they just have this card, or have this fight on the card just because Justin Tafa is Australian. That's the only reason. Neither one of these guys are high skill level, and neither one of these guys is relevant to the heavyweight division. Do I think it has a chance to be a potential finish? Yeah. I mean, Justin Tafa has 5 wins. All 5 of them are by knockout. Parker Porter, 12 wins, 8 stoppages, 5 by knockout, 3 by submission. So I think this has the potential to be an exciting fight. But outside of that, I think it's going to be a very low-level fight. If it goes into the late rounds or, second half of the second round or the third round, depending on the pace, I think both guys are going to be super gassed. And I'm just not really looking forward to this fight. Parker Porter's coming in off a loss to Jalton Almeida. Justin Tafa's coming in, lost 2 out of his last 3. His only win is against Harry Hunsucker, who never even belonged in the UFC, in my opinion. So this is, again, just one of those, filler fights on a pay-per-view card, the magnitude that UFC 284 is supposed to be with the main event. Moving up on the card, you have Jack Della Maddalena versus Randy Brown. This is where the card starts to improve drastically. Now, Jack Della Maddalena versus Randy Brown is a very good fight. I'm really looking forward to this fight. It does not belong on a pay-per-view main card. Bare minimum, it could open up a pay-per-view main card, in my opinion. I just don't think this is a fight that should be a featured fight on a pay-per-view. Jack Della Maddalena has really never fought anyone of a high skill level, but he's looked very promising. He is a very good contender. He's undefeated within the UFC. He's going out there and stopping pretty much everyone he fights. The last 3 fights, first round KOs or TKOs. Randy Brown has looked really good. He's on a little bit of a win streak right now, 4-fight win streak. He's been around for a little bit longer than Jack Della Maddalena. And I think this is a good fight because Jack Della Maddalena, a lot of people are looking at him as a future welterweight contender, but he hasn't really fought great competition yet. And Randy Brown's not the elite of the elite. He's not even a top contender. But this is definitely a step up in competition over, like his last opponent was Danny Roberts. The fight before that was Ramazan Ameev. I think Randy Brown is a step up in competition. I think Randy Brown is a good measuring stick to see where Jack Della Maddalena is. Is the hype warranted? It's not a crazy amount of hype, but is the hype warranted? We will find out against Randy Brown. If Jack Della Maddalena goes out there and stops a guy like Randy Brown, we will see that he is a very, decent fighter. I won't say it's not going to prove that he's an elite fighter, but it will prove that the high hopes that people have for him are warranted. It's the first big step up, and I think this is going to be an action-packed fight. I think this fight is relevant to the weight class. Again, Jack Della Maddalena has the, opportunity to prove himself a little bit within the division. And, I think this fight has the potential to be a very exciting back and forth fight. So I like this fight. Does it belong on a pay-per-view main card? Probably not. If it does, it deserves to open up the pay-per-view main card. But I can't find a whole lot to complain about with this fight. I think both guys are fairly skilled. I think both guys are fun to watch. So I'm not going to complain about that fight other than the placement on the card. But I do understand because of injuries, because of Paulo Costa's contract situation, this is kind of where the card ended up falling. Moving up on the card to the co-main event, we have Yair Rodriguez versus Josh Emmett for the interim featherweight title. This is an excellent fight. Now, we can have a debate whether or not there should be an interim title on the line, and I think the UFC is too quick to throw out interim titles, but nonetheless, this is a great matchup. Yair Rodriguez, I know, his last fight wasn't super definitive. He fought Brian Ortega. Brian Ortega injured his shoulder early in the first round, but the fight before that against Max Holloway, even in a loss, Yair Rodriguez looked incredible. The fight before that was against Jeremy Stephens. He looked really good in that fight, but it was against Jeremy Stephens. And the featherweight division is kind of in a weird spot because you have Yair coming off a big win, but it was inconclusive because of an injury. And then you have Josh Emmett, who in his last 2 fights, you can make an argument that he lost both of them. That last fight against Calvin Kattar, I'm not saying it was a robbery. but I thought Calvin Kattar won that fight, and a lot of people would agree with me. And I think the activity of Josh Emmett hitting the forearms of Calvin Kattar are what won him that fight. So I'm kind of happy that we're not seeing Josh Emmett jump into a title shot against Alexander Volkanovski. But nonetheless, this is now for an interim belt of Volkanovski fighting on the same card. We're going to talk about his fight in a second. But if you put that aside, this is a very high-level fight. Yair Rodriguez, one of the most dynamic strikers in the UFC, some of the most unbelievable kicks I've ever seen in the UFC. And Josh Emmett, say what you will about him. I know a lot of people, kind of crap on him a bit, say he's not exciting. Josh Emmett's a relatively exciting fighter. His fight against Calvin Kattar was pretty exciting. His fight against Dan Ige, which I actually thought he lost that fight too, but that fight was razor close. Really exciting. The fight against Shane Burgos, exciting. So Josh Emmett's not a boring fighter. He's a high-level fighter. He's super well-rounded. He's super durable, has good power, has good wrestling. Yair's looked better than ever. He's looking like he's improving. The kicks are phenomenal. The gas tank looked amazing against Max Holloway. He arguably won the 5th round. And it has some high stakes on the line. It does have an interim title on the line. Now, that's just, a ticket to fight Alexander Volkanovski if he does, in fact, come back down to featherweight. But if Volkanovski wins against Islam Makhachev and wins the lightweight title in the fight we're going to talk about here in a second, then the winner of Yair Rodriguez versus Josh Emmett could potentially be promoted to the undisputed featherweight champion. So this fight has massive stakes on the line. This fight is between two elite level fighters. And, this fight has the potential to be relatively exciting. It's a fan-friendly matchup. So this is a really solid fight. I'm really looking forward to it. Even if that title wasn't there, this is a #1 contender fight and a great matchup. So I'm really looking forward to that co-main event. Moving on to the main event of UFC 284, we have Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski. Absolute incredible matchup. I'm really looking forward to this matchup. I know it hasn't been getting the level of hype that it probably deserves, and I think a lot of people, it's crazy because everyone went from doubting Islam Makhachev to now saying, oh, he's a shoo-in to beat Alexander Volkanovski. They were talking about, oh, his best wins over Bobby Green. Now they're saying, oh, the Volkanovski fight isn't going to be competitive. And I've fallen victim to that as well, just saying this fight, I think Islam Makhachev's too big, too strong. But this is a fight that could genuinely go either way. Alexander Volkanovski, pound for pound. I mean, he's ranked pound for pound #1. Islam Makhachev's ranked pound for pound #2. Now, I don't put a whole lot of stock in those rankings, but that goes to show you how high level this fight is. Regardless of those rankings, Islam Makhachev is one of the best lightweight fighters we've ever seen. And Alexander Volkanovski, you can already make a case that he is the greatest of all time at featherweight. You can still make the case for Jose Aldo. Some people try to still make it for Max Holloway. I lean Alexander Volkanovski unless you count the WEC, resume of Jose Aldo. So Volkanovski, one of the best fighters I've ever seen, one of the most well-rounded fighters I've ever seen. And Islam Makhachev, say what you will about his resume, he's on a long win streak, so is Volkanovski. Volkanovski's never lost in the UFC. And say what you will about Makhachev's resume, he went out there and dismantled Charles Oliveira in his last fight at UFC 280. Incredible performance. Volkanovski, look what he did to Max Holloway in that trilogy fight. People were saying Max Holloway's the uncrowned champ after that second fight that was super close. And look what Volkanovski did at UFC 276. Went out there and beat the brakes off of Max Holloway. And I'm just really looking forward to this matchup. It's a true super fight. The term super fight is thrown around far too much in today's day and age. And this is a true, actual UFC super fight. You have the lightweight champion in Islam Makhachev fighting the featherweight champion in Alexander Volkanovski. And this, the stakes couldn't be higher because Volkanovski is looking to become a simultaneous double champ. And for Islam Makhachev, this is his first title defense. And he's fighting a guy who's pound for pound #1, who, probably has the best chance at defeating him. And if he loses this fight, where does Islam Makhachev go from there? Because is anyone really going to say Islam Makhachev deserves an immediate rematch? He just became champion. So is he going to the back of the line? And you have a litany of contenders lining up for a lightweight title shot. So this means a lot to both fighters. Both are elite of the elite within the UFC. Islam Makhachev's grappling is second to none. His submission skills are second to none. His striking is ever improving. His stamina has looked good. And then you have Volkanovski. I mean, literally elite at everything. Elite striker, elite grappler, elite submission defense. I mean, there's nothing you can't compliment Alexander Volkanovski on. Super durable, unbelievable stamina, unbelievable variety of attacks. So this fight is very, very compelling. It's not getting enough credit. And I think it's just because people are overestimating Islam Makhachev just because of how good he looked in that Charles Oliveira fight. And, you know, this is an incredible main event and a true super fight. I'm really looking forward to it. Now, as far as my grade for UFC 284, I really think this is really a two-fight card. You know, Islam Makhachev, Alexander Volkanovski for the lightweight title, and then Yair Rodriguez versus Josh Emmett for the interim featherweight title. And then the rest of the card leaves a lot to be desired. You know, outside of Della Maddalena versus Randy Brown, I could skip the rest of the main card. And I wouldn't lose any sleep over it at all. And I wouldn't miss anything, you know, relevant to the UFC in terms of the top contenders or even the top 15 or any high-level fighters for that matter. So I think it's really hard to grade this card because I do think the main event matchup is being underrated. I do think it's a quality fight. And I'm really looking forward to these top two fights. So it's really hard to grade this card. But I am going to grade UFC 284. I am going to give it a 5.5 out of 10. And that's just because of that main event. Honestly, without that main event, this card is not even a fight night card. But I think that main event is so good in Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski. I think you have to grade this card at about a 5.5. And then you have Yair Rodriguez versus Josh Emmett. Those two fights alone, I think it's worth giving it that grade because I think, you know, even though it's a two-fight card, you at least, you know, look at those two title fights. You can see, you know, Yair Rodriguez versus Josh Emmett. You could see potentially the winner there fighting Alexander Volkanovski in the future. So you kind of have, you know, even though Volkanovski's fighting in a different division, you kind of see a future matchup playing out on the same card depending on what happens on the card. And then the fact you have a true super fight at the top, I still think it's a fight card worth watching. As far as whether or not you should order it, let me put it this way. I think you should, but at the same time, if you're not absolutely in love with Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski, I wouldn't waste your money on it. If you're not in love with that main event, you should just skip it, catch the replay, catch the highlights. Don't waste your hard-earned money on this card. But if you enjoy watching high-level MMA, I think Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski is worth the price alone. Do I wish this card was more stacked? Of course I do. Do I wish Robert Whittaker versus Paulo Costa was on the card? Yes, I do. If that fight was still on the card, I'd probably give this like a 6.5 instead. You know, then if you still had Kai Kara France versus Alex Perez on the card, it's probably looking at like a 7.5 or an 8. That's how much damage this card has taken from injuries, from contract disputes. You know, it's really kind of a letdown because you have such a big main event. Even if it's not going to do, you know, massive in terms of a buy rate, it's still a big fight. It's still a high-level fight. And, you know, I think the card, you know, I can't complain about it too much just because it kind of fell apart a little bit. But I think a solid 5.5. I think if you love that main event, you have to order it. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Are you going to order UFC 284? Are you going to skip it? Is there anyone out there that's going to skip this card? And also, what grade 1 through 10 would you give UFC 284? Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.